So I'm sure a lot of you guys heard there's a lot of reports of increased biking all over the world, especially in cities. And today I just wanted to talk a little bit about that, like what I'm seeing, what I'm experiencing, specifically here in New York City. I'm sure there's lots of reports and data on why this is the case, and people can draw all sorts of conclusions on that. And personally, I'm not a scientist. I really want to just go by like what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing from people, what I'm discovering, so to speak. I think COVID has a lot to do with it. The increased bike infrastructure. There's kind of a lot of these things that are just coming together all at the same time. There's lots of trends or things that are contributing to this big change. I mean, we've seen an increase in biking overall over the past several years, and that's part of the reason why in this business I believe in it. I think that that's really the future. I think a lot of people feel that way as well. But there's certainly a lot of factors which are contributing to more rapid growth in this immediate time now, which really kind of started last spring of 2020, roundabout when COVID started to really become a big deal. We saw more and more people getting out biking, and I guess at that time maybe most of that increase was because people couldn't do other forms of activities, outdoor activities. You couldn't really play basketball or baseball or whatever, all these other group sports. But you can go ride a bicycle, you can take a walk. I think places like New York, where they're improving the bike infrastructure, putting more and more bike lanes, people can feel safer, you can get to more places by bike in a safe way. It kind of makes sense. So I think that was probably the initial wave or that movement towards that trend. But there's probably a lot of other factors that contribute to that as well. Some of the things I think about specifically in New York is riding the subway. A lot of people ride the subway. Really, a full cross section of New Yorkers ride the subway. It's not always the case in other places. Like, for example, in LA, it seems to be it's not like as wide of a demographic of people that use the train. It's really unfortunate from my perspective, and maybe that's some pushes from other interests kind of don't want this sort of thing to happen. I kind of do. I think that the places that I've been in the world that I've enjoyed the most, many of them had good public transportation. It's really nice to be able to explore a city and hop on a train or use a bike, etc. And it's unfortunate that LA doesn't really have that, but it's getting there. But we're going to more focus on New York specifically. So the subway, like, I've ridden it a little bit since I've been here, and I've noticed that it's definitely a lot less crowded, but at times it still can be crowded. So I think for the people that do want to ride the subway and maintain distance and that sort of thing, it can be kind of challenging. And although they're, cleaning them regularly, and there's definitely increased, attention to that, still, if you consider, the safer modes of transportation, subway is probably not high up on the list as much as there's these reports out there that are trying to prove otherwise. But biking, works. You can keep a reasonable distance from people. You kind of have a little bit more control over your own space. We're actually talking recently with somebody about carrying their kids, and I was thinking about carrying the kids on a bike as opposed to carrying the kids like on the subway or bringing them on the subway, and the idea of taking kids on the subway and trying to say like, don't touch anything. I can't imagine that's an easy task, or it's a challenge for a child, especially if maybe they're not as well behaved. So, but putting them like inside of a cargo bike or something like that seems to work. But there's plenty of other ways to get around, and historically some of these things have been in the rise, right? Like Uber and Lyft, the car sharing stuff. That's been very popular over the last several years, but I think this past year, I don't really know the data on this specifically, but I would have to anticipate that that's decreased pretty significantly. I mean, again, you're in close quarters with this other person, and you don't really know what their situation is. Like, are they sick? Maybe they're sick, but they feel like they have to work. I don't know, is Uber like testing people before they go to work? I doubt it. Will it continue? I think that's probably, for me, one of the more important things. Like, are we going to see this trend? Like, as some have reported, it could be considered like a bike boom, which is like a pretty significant increase. Some reported like over 50%, upwards 100%, more, like doubling more or less. I think that it can continue. I think it can especially continue in a place like New York, provided that the infrastructure and all the supporting resources go along with it, right? So infrastructure, usually when people hear bike infrastructure, they think about bike lanes, but actually other infrastructure which could be really important is like bike parking. This is an important topic that really doesn't come up that much, unfortunately, but I think it's a really important one, especially in New York. Maybe if you live in a more rural area, it's not as big of a concern. You have your garage to keep it in or whatever, but for a lot of people in New York, that's in no way a reality. And then on top of that, you live in a walk-up apartment or something like that. Like, how do you manage that? So you have, all these different modes of transportation. I guess one of them could be taking your own personal car, but then you're, contributing to more traffic, and parking, as you may or may not know, is oftentimes nearly impossible in the city, and especially in Manhattan. But it's also just not such a great way to experience the city. We were riding around recently. We did this tour around the city, and one thing you might notice if you watch that video is that there's just all these little pockets throughout the city. And if you're in a car or if you're in a subway, although I guess if you're in a subway, you take it somewhere and you can walk around and that sort of thing, and that's great. But having something more human scale, whether you're walking or biking or taking an electric bike, it's easy just to stop and, experience something, enjoy something, check it out, take a photo, whatever. And that's just not the same with, these other modes. I gotta imagine that some people historically just haven't even wanted to go out on a bike for the first time. I know that I've spoken to many people in that regard where they said, well, hey, I don't feel safe. I don't feel comfortable to go out on a bike because I'm afraid of cars, and historically maybe there was not enough protected bikeways throughout the city, but now that's ever increasing. And so I think maybe that's a shift that's happening. Maybe overall it's just a trend. People tend to follow other people. Most people do, I think. Most people don't seem to take their own path, if you will. So I think that's a thing. People see oh yeah, my friend's out biking. More and more friends are talking about it, and then that kind of contributes to more people considering getting out on a bike. I mean, you go to a place like the Netherlands where this is culturally the norm. Here, it's kind of getting there, but we still got a little ways to go. In New York, that it's that way, and in contrast, in LA. Similar to where I grew up on Long Island, if you ride a bike for transportation, people look at you a little bit weird. I guess in beach cities, it's kind of more accepted, but maybe many other places it's not so accepted or not so popular. So people are like, oh, that's strange. Why do you do that? Where in New York, well, yeah, I ride a bike, to get to work or to run errands or whatever the case may be. So culturally, I think that that's a really big deal. And I think it's often not really considered when thinking about the different factors of why people are doing it or not doing it. Having that change, having more bike share, having, bikes more accessible, it being safer, I think all these things, it just all kind of coming together in this perfect storm, if you will. Whatever it is, I like it. I'm excited about it. This, for me, in a lot of ways, is something that I saw coming in the city for years as I started to get back into biking and started to think more about biking for transportation. This is one of the reasons why I moved to New York City, or more specifically Brooklyn, to move my business here and really help to educate more people about bikes and electric bikes and the possibilities of these tools. Because really I look at them as tools, as transportation tools, or even tools for your health. That's really mostly what I wanted to talk about on this topic, and really these are just ideas, and I think there's an opportunity to have more discussion around these things, and I'm seeing this starting to happen in some of the comments, and I really enjoy that. I really appreciate that. I think that these ideas, we should be talking about them more. We should be talking about them with our friends and family, or really different people that can help make decisions. Because for me, I can see this future where there is more biking in cities, and don't get me wrong, like I'm not saying like, oh yeah, cars need to go away everywhere and cars are the worst thing ever. I certainly see their usefulness in many scenarios, but I think inside of cities can be a lot more livable, a lot more enjoyable, a lot safer if we start to think about them a little bit differently. Start to think about how we allocate space and resources to accommodate people, or their different modes of transportation. One other point about riding an electric bike or riding a bike in the city is it's generally faster. That's been my experience, but also I think there's a good amount of data to back that up as well. And just as like a little demonstration, I guess, I just want to show you how I would generally come to some conclusion about that. Now, I personally use Google Maps usually when I'm trying to navigate somewhere. I really like it because it gives me all the different modes of transportation options that are available. They usually show like a car or automobile, public transportation, whether it's subway, bus, or a combination, or even potentially a ferry, which we actually have ferries that come in here. I think there's one coming in now, actually. And then walking is included, as well as biking and car share. I don't know where I'm counting 3 here. I think I'm at 5 maybe. But yeah, so car share. They also include planes, which is kind of interesting. I don't know if that's specifically relevant to today. I just want to talk about like going from here in Dumbo, right by the base of the Brooklyn Bridge, to my store, which is Flushing Avenue, right by the Navy Yard, little less than a mile. So I pulled it up here on Google Maps. If I search for the address, I just do 134 Flushing Avenue, and I go to directions. So the first one, by default, it shows car, which something, I don't know. I wonder if Google could consider maybe changing that and defaulting to something different in the city, but whatever. I don't make too big of a deal about that. But the car, by default, it shows 8 minutes. Now the subway, or actually you wouldn't take a subway, you take a bus, shows 18 minutes. Walking is 30 minutes. Car share is 8 minutes, which based on this here, it shows it's the fastest, but based on experience, maybe, just updated to 9 minutes. I don't know, maybe they're getting busy. Good for you, Uber. Yeah, the reason why I say car share might be one of the fastest, because actually if you look at car at 8 minutes, you also have to consider parking. I mean, well, I think you should consider parking if you actually want to look at it as truly as a form of transportation. And knowing from my own personal experience, it's not always so easy to park in the city. So you might spend 8 minutes traveling to your destination and then another 15 minutes actually looking for parking. And 15 minutes could even be an understatement. I'm sure for people that have lived or have been to New York City, you can attest to that as well. But then we look at a bike. So here it shows 9 minutes. Now this is based on a traditional bicycle. Now I've generally found these numbers to be a little bit higher than what I experience riding on an electric bike. Now I do generally tend to ride a little bit faster. I do keep it safe. I gotta make sure I'm clear about that. But when I have the space to do so, I generally ride a bit faster. And, so something that says 9 minutes, I'm probably going to be more like 7 minutes. Now, I'm not trying to just say like, oh yeah, I'm totally going to be faster than everything else. But you can get an idea there, especially like, as I said, when you do consider parking. I did put the plane in there just for reference, and you see that it doesn't give us an option. Maybe one day. I don't know. Elon, you're listening? No. But so that's that. It's just a little anecdotal example to give you an idea of what it's like. I mean, that's a short distance. Maybe you're going a little bit further. It might be a difference. It really depends on the traffic. But I think it really is important when considering using a car, how you're going to deal with parking. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Let me know if you want to see more of these sort of videos or these sort of topics. I hope you do. I anticipate making more of them, just talking more in a general way, starting discussions more about these sort of ideas, these trends that I'm seeing, and just kind of giving opportunity to bring a little bit more life to them, or a little more light, I should say. I think it deserves it, and it's an interesting time. It's definitely an exciting time in that regard. I know some other things are not so exciting about this, but try to keep it positive, try to look on the bright side, and well, hope to see you guys soon.